Patrick, so good to have you on the pod.
Thank
Your
you.
name, your name crossed my feed so much, and I was around posting positive or inspirational sports stories. And in my mind, you were the sports guy, and I really wanted to get you on the pod to talk, sport and politics, but just what the playing field is. And I think you're well placed to sit there. You also wear many other hats, and we'll dive into that as we get through the show. But thank you for coming on.
Okay, my pleasure. I've never met a bad Patrick, and good to see you've continued that run.
And shout out to the Celtics. He's wearing it up top.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the name that we both share.
Well, it's just so much in that little green badge. It's so meaningful. Brands in sport just contain so much emotional highs and lows. They're so meaningful, and they're such a constant in people's lives that I love what these brands stand for.
It's true, and they mean so much to so many people. Even a bit of difference in there, which gives such strength to the brand. I wanted to start it off and just see what your into sport was. Was there a moment? Is there something that you remember vividly where you're like, "Oh, this is it for me," or is it just a continued relationship that you've developed over time with all sport?
I think if I look back deep into my archives, I think when I used to go on holiday playing tennis ball cricket with random kids that I had never met that would be around the same age, in the same area. Sometimes you'd stay in a motel next to a caravan park, and there was a green space, and all the kids would converge. And I just have the most unbelievable memories of playing with kids, befriending kids, being sad that everyone's departing back to wherever, and sport was at its most primal binding element of and then the laughing, and then all of a sudden you go to their room and eating their mum's watermelon, and I just thought sport was this great thing. And even in school, it was unbelievable how sport, if this kids playing soccer over there would get 15 new friends immediately. You break into teams, you're pulling off a last minute save, which saves the team, and you're picking up stuff. Some guys like obviously more into it than everybody else, and he's doing step overs or he's got some trick, and just the rote learning from each other and the joy of the shared expedition and shared, as they say, anyone with chunky thighs that has bushwalked, when the second person gets chafe, it's almost like shared pain is good pain. I'm not alone. And on the soccer field, when you lose 11-0, at least there's another 11 guys you can divide it by, and someone will have a positive, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and provide an inspirational way out. And then it makes the victory all the sweeter, and the reward for teamwork, the reward for passing it around in football and winning. And I don't see anything else teaching these things. A lot of the silo us off into individuals and hurt us against each other, which school effectively is, if there's, some sort of pointy end as far as some kids get into certain areas and some don't. So sport just remains this timeless, meandering, my great-great-grandfather could have supported the Celtics, and I support the Celtics, and it's just something we have in common. Food changes, music tastes. I mean, who listens to what their grandparents listen to? I do. I'm a bit strange like that, but I think there's gold in every musical era, but this is a timeless thing where granddad and grandson can go out to a Richmond game or go out to a Balmain Tigers game and experience something equally and beautifully. And that's where I think it's the most magical thing we have.
It is. You hit on such good tones there, just that shared experience and a playing field where people can learn in such an uncommon way compared to how we sit in a classroom. And you hit on that really interesting around the things that we pick up on other families. Like I remember in my life, it was such an introduction sport. I played a lot of soccer, introduction into different cultural backgrounds. It's how, learn a lot of Italian, a lot of Greek, Egyptian, just, and be introduced to different families and different ways people work. And likewise with myself, and my family background, it was such a space to share, like an invitation for people to just share their background, their strengths, their weaknesses, and others to pick up on that, not just on the playing field, but off. It's a unique spot like that. And you really take that and run with that. And it's beautiful to see, and a reminder. And I can feel that now with my youngest daughter just starting little athletics comes from a particular school with particular community, but then little athletics exposes kids to different, realities, different ways of doing things, and it's just such a healthy way to do that because there's a key focus that allows you to absorb other things without necessarily focusing in on it. Whereas politics or a different way that we say turn our attention to things, I think it does it in a polarizing way and ever so more. Do you feel like there's a big analogy on sport and life? Like, are you a believer in that, or is it more
It's a
something
mirror.
else?
Sport is a microcosm. Sport is a mirror. Everything is there. Well, everything we needed to be delivered in the old hunter-gatherer days, sport still delivers. We are herd animals, effectively. We fear exclusion. To be excluded from the herd in the old days meant death. So, when you're a little multicultural kid turning up for that to a new soccer club and you don't have language, it's a terrifying first thing. But like everything, if you fight through the first bit, there's gold on the other side. Joseph Campbell, one of the most revered philosophers of the last century, said that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I remember, you want to feel belonging, you want to be part of something, you just got to go through the first uncomfortable bit in sport, and then everyone's besties, and it's like, how could we have not been like this all the time? And you see it even with season ticket holders that sit next to each other at games and eventually become kind of lifelong friends just because they're going through the highs and lows in sport. The most important thing about sport is it teaches you to lose. If you haven't played sport, there's a chance you've never taken an L your entire life. So when it comes, you think the world's falling. It breeds catastrophists. Whereas when you have a season where you get pumped by 10 goals every game, and they're the greatest ones because somehow you find a bit of backbone, or just winning the second half in one game might be the new goal you set. But you're a band of brothers or sisters, or mixed touch footy team, and you're on this journey together, and it teaches you, like in the AFL, there are 17 teams that lose. But within those 17 teams, there's personal best, there's massive wins, there's people that went from 12th to 6th, who realize it's a journey. And if you're not being taught that by sport teaches you to share. Team sports do. Sport teaches you that consistently showing up is the compound interest way of living. You don't see how it's building, but you look at your skill acquisition at the end of the year. Sport teaches you that you stick at something and you get better and better at it. It teaches you all these things, but it teaches you to get on with other humans as well. When some people grow up with just a basic streak of DNA that they have to blame other people and deflect, and sport teaches you that, you can blame people all you want, but that 5-week stint in reserves when you didn't listen to the coach and did your own thing or did something not good for the team, that makes you stew away and die 1,000 deaths, but you come back a new person and you're much fitter for life, because you're going to come up against people you don't like in the workplace, people that niggle you, people that kick your ass at uni. You're going to miss out on lots of jobs. There's a cone of opportunity in every industry, and there's a whole stack of people missing out in lots of verticals in their lives. And as Kipling said, if you learn, sport teaches you that, to meet triumph and disaster and the same, just treat them both as imposters that are going to happen on the journey.
Wise words. You definitely become the sports philosopher in my mind. It's
thank you. Well, there's so much there. It's so rich, and people get clumsy. I hear people in the arts industry always, whinging that sport gets. But whenever the arts puts themselves into a competitive environment where there's winners and losers and tears, the voice rates through the roof. We know that it's like sport. We know their backstories, but when people want art to be appreciated in an uncontested sense, then you're not exposing yourself to the potential of loss and disappointment, and that's the risk we like to see in our sports people. I love boxing, and I'm always on the guy that loses because he had a crack. He went up there, probably knew he wasn't up for it. It was 1 in 100 chance, but he put it on the line and found out and tried his best. And I think there's more gold in the losers than there are winners, because they're often in their own world of personal best. They've overcome all sorts of mountains to go and take on the great Goliath, and not everyone can be David.
That's well said. And the skin in the game, I think everyone can relate to with sport and learn from. And it definitely is a cauldron of forging attitudes, I think, in life, and can be so formative around how people take their attitude and carry that past the field. But I wanted to dig in on you around the referee and the role of a referee in sport and how important that is and what that actually represents, and then how it bleeds out and how a referee gets spoken about and that change.
Well, the referee, I think, is the most fascinating human in sport. I mean, what drives someone, and a lot of them don't get paid, so it has to be a passion. What drives someone to put yourself between two sets of 15-year-olds? Unnecessary, but it can't happen without this person. So they are the absolute essential service in sport. And if you want to ever wonder why there's a need for referees, have guys play against each other unumpired and just watch it degenerate into a farce of subconscious bias and weirdness and aggression and denial. It's hilarious. It's Lord of the Flies. So you need this person sitting right between, and they're not protected. They're opened up to embarrassment like no one would ever do at their kids' arts concert or anything like that. And again, quoting great philosophers, the giants that have walked before us, Carl Jung once said, the beautiful quote, the biggest burden a child will carry is the unlived life of the parent. And isn't that the case? Just basically almost like a ventriloquist. They're feeding stuff into their kids, negative stuff, aggressive stuff. Maybe they fell short. Maybe they were the tough guy, and they're making little Johnny live up to that ancient legacy that the poor little kid's been labouring under. There's so many dynamics at play, to the point where I think absolutely they should be banning parents from watching. Just get out, go to the coffee shop, have a gossip, whatever. Just get away from the sidelines, because even shouting instructions to their kid at odds with the coach, the mixed messaging of that, putting the kid on the spot. Do I listen to the coach that my dad's told me to listen to, or do I listen to my dad that's coming in with conflicting advice? That can ultimately lead up to a kid not wanting to play anymore, overriding wanting to play with their mates, which is a true tragedy and can be a very destructive element to their social, because they may need team sports. They may be the type of person that thrives, not the one-on-one. They like being in the comfort and the banter and the sense of belonging that a team provides. So, and here you've got these guys going a 15-year-old ref. Anywhere else that would be viewed on as the most rank piece of cowardice on earth. But this great blind spot, which is grassroots sport. Then you've got heroes in media having a go at the referees and umpires with the benefits of hindsight and replays, and not at all acknowledging in any case or form the validation that their behaviour gives to people sitting on the couch, which feeds into the kids, which feeds into the sideline. So there's a whole cancerous ecosystem where all of the sports, the whole lot, are experiencing terrible churn rates, up to 35%. And I've spoken to a lot of them, and they don't really want to attribute it to sideline abuse, because there are other factors. People go through life stages, but it's definitely there, and it's a deep undercurrent, and it's still looked as weakness. Because when you sign up for referees, you're going in for abuse. But if you copped it to the point of mental health and wanted to leave and your life improved by dropping that, then that's a disastrous state of affairs. So we've got this, even back to the 1850s, because they had gambling in sport heavily back then. It was often the only reason it was funded and put on. Referee abuse was happening way back, led by the gamblers. And if you sit in a pub and there's a controversial decision, someone's had a 20 or 100, or it's ruined their multi or whatever, the venom that they go and just the seriousness by which they take it it's almost like, mate, we need to video that. Just play it back when you're been released as a hostage of the Red Mists, and just have a look at yourself, man.
That is an interesting concept of having the replay.
You can take that one up. I'll hold your jacket. You can go into TABs and be the filming guy. But yeah, it's a blind spot, and we have a thing that there is a broader piece of disrespect for authority figures in this country, and it manifests itself you look at parking inspectors literally enforcing a law. They get abused. Politicians get abused when they dare leave their castles and go and walk the hustings left and right. When ScoMo went down to that bushfire, we have a convicty thing, weird thing, where there's a constant disrespect for authority, talking about the side of the mouth, which is a legacy of old, not letting the British Guards know what we're talking about. It's all thrown into a cultural soup, which leads to, plus you've got kids lacking the engagement tools that gave respect to elders like they traditionally did. And where else except a sporting dressing room do a bunch of pimply 17-year-old hormonal boys and girls listen intently to every word of a 55-year-old male or female coach? Where else? It happened in music. Shut up, old man. I don't want to hear jazz. Food is like, oh, look, that's war food, granddad. It's it, it's this intergenerational glue. And switching back to referees, I mean, they just enable it to happen week in, week out. And hearing about in Brazil, referees are carrying guns. People are wearing Kevlar. Some tournaments around aren't going ahead without. Refs are walking around like some sci-fi thing with packs here and cameras on their heads, and it's like, what are we
Yeah.
doing? How's it gotten to this? How is that? Just have police at every match and arrest them. Why do you get a free
Yeah.
pass to do this at our beautiful, important property developers don't touch these things, green spaces, which are the centerpiece of the community, the village green in old English terms. Everywhere had their green space where everyone came together. And right now, that's the only place the permissible place you can get away with all sorts of abuse.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point, and it is sort of culturally ingrained that sort of umpires being a space to be voice your frustrations, whether you know it or not, around things in your life that you're frustrated with. That's what it always feels like. Sometimes it gets billed like that, or definitely in AFL, people go there, they call it therapy, where they just yell absurdities, and it's
Yeah.
usually directed at the umpire. Um, and
I'm getting
it's
bullied by the guy in accounts, so I'll go and shout at that guy and get out of my system.
Yeah, it's a strange mentality, but it also maybe speaks to a little bit about where we are as a society, and also the frustrations around. It's a bit of a barometer, whether it be in a community. I always found that playing sport, the sort of tone, the feel, it is a barometer that what the umpire is taking on, not it's unfairly put upon them, but it is a barometer for a community or a sport, how they're being treated, and how they exit and enter the game. It's a hard one, and they do control they can control fates, which is a really unique position to be in as umpires. And now we see it with the VAR. Technology intersects there. It's such a dynamic space that I don't think we interrogate enough around how it represents sort of the way we govern ourselves into the future, and what an umpire is, and those sort of plays. But jumping off the umpire and into sort of sports commentary, doing a little dig around yourself, you've definitely been a journalist in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've written some really interesting books, but what's your take on where we are now around the death of linear TV, and we're entering into very much a live sort of reimagining what sports commentary is, how it looks, and how it's brought to a younger generation who exists on clicks and bite-sized information, but a long-form narrative or feeling there. What's your read on that, and where do you see that going into the future?
I see two key phenomena at play. One is fragmentation, that the thought of us watching the same thing randomly now is almost impossible. And it was very normal in the old days of 5 channels. Now for us we have to make a concerted effort or be part of a community that's all pointing in. UFC is a perfect example. There's a whole underground community that's watching an event at a time. You see them crystallize under a hashtag on various social media. So the fragmentation is the big one, but the democratization. In the days of 5 channels, those 5 channels, no one else could see any. If you were hockey, if you were anything second tier that didn't have either a huge amount of existing physical infrastructure in place, you don't have to worry about building things. It's already there. A huge participation army underneath you that naturally feeds into broadcast dollars. There was no way you could rise up. Now, rugby's on Stan, A-League's on Paramount. So the challenge is you've got to build your hardcore army that can make it worthwhile. You've got to show how much you care for the sport, that you're prepared to aggregate like an army of consumers that can leverage that bulk buying power into broadcast rights. Like, I look at field hockey and I kind of don't get it. We're the best in the world. Every 4 years we expect gold from these guys. I never see, when you drive through the suburbs, the classic drive across to the other side of town, and in cricket you've probably seen 30 different matches. They're on main roads. Hockey seems to be cooped away. I never sort of see it ever in my general travels. It's got India. It's got an incredible global footprint. But you can't ever see even a highlight or a match in anger because they can't. I think there might be a disparity between playing it and watching it, or I don't fully get it. But that's hockey was one I thought was really going to go to the next level with this democratization, and it hasn't happened. But hardcore sports like BMX, surfing, I've got mates in meetings who will be keeping an eye on, the pipeline masters, just watching them going along waves on their phones. You go to weddings now. There'll always be someone with a sneaky thing. It was always just horse racing in the old days, where people would have, be listening to the fifth at Ramwick. So I think that the impact of democratization and the fragmentation are twofold. It puts such a premium back on live sport, where we still have that feeling with it as a nation, we're all doing the one thing together. So that's why something like State of Origin is super important. The AFL Grand Final, Melbourne Cup, whenever the Matildas play for something high stakes, these are huge nation-building events that everyone can tune into. But yeah, underneath that, it's really up to you now. People always complain, I don't have the platform, I can't do it. Now you have to get organised, and you've got to deliver your people as numbers or consumers. You've got to behave like those people. But the opportunity's there. Wasn't there before. So I think there's going to be a 10 or 15 year lag until sports realise it's all in their hands now. There's no excuses.
Yeah, and big time in the team. We've spoken a little bit about this, but just sort of that multifaceted way of approaching it. But grassroots really seems to have a limelight now in terms of the supporter has the mic, and often that's the most engaging content that I feel like a lot of people are tuning into, and the numbers are there, and it's a new form of sort of conversation that sits there. And it feels more approachable because it feels less broadcasty and more run-of-the-mill sort of conversations. Some of them are taking a different take here, but the clubs or the organisations that stand to benefit that are the ones who support that the most, I feel. And that's what's unique about, I don't know where the actual money's going to be made there or who's going to actually capitalise on that momentum. But the fact that the appetite's there for grassroots is a beautiful thing, I feel, because it throws different.
Are your 5,000 people each prepared to pay $10 a month to be part of your thing? You're prepared to do it for Netflix. Are you prepared to do it for hockey? Because that goes to subsidising a TV broadcast. But you know what I mean. There's laziness as well. People aren't. If I'm not interested in the sport, I'm not going to watch 1.5 hours of it. You bring me the ones that are winning are the smart ones that are just putting that extra time in and building the little clips that feed into our current, global not ADHD, but a complete emulsification of attention spans. And some people do formally have ADHD as well, but I think there's also people who think they do now because their attention spans have so changed in alignment with the consumption changes on how we get things that they think it's actually been a medical, they've been beset by a medical phenomena because they can't even watch movies, or a 2-hour movie is like some sort of long hell. When I used to write for The Guardian, I'm no different. When I used to write for The Guardian, I used to get sometimes 2,500 words, and the latest couple I've done, 750 words is a long read because everyone's on their phones, and more than 750 words feels like some sort of doom scroll into like, are we finished yet? Where on the big screen, 2,500 words was the magic, and the internet was supposed to allow us unlimited real estate, but now it's get it done in 5 seconds. A little open the first 5 seconds of a YouTube video, get it done.
It's headlines. Yeah, you got to deliver. You got to say what you're going to deliver, and then deliver over time. It's
Yeah.
interesting format. F1 is something everyone turns to as a good platform for how they've done, and that's embed emotion into a pretty dry sport, um, and turned eyeballs heavily there. That's a fascinating case study that a lot of people are focusing on now.
Well, you've
Um,
touched on the key point, and that is it's what was Drive to Survive. It was emotional storytelling.
that's it.
Or after that, you had to love or hate certain drivers because everyone's just looking for their type of person who's representing them on the on the field. Some people like the guy with the big afro because that's a haircut that he would love to have, and the guy looks like he's a bit of a sort of a relaxed cool guy. Others like the sprinting wingers, the super speedy guys. Others like the captain who stands tall when all around him or her is falling around them. So, but if you don't know any of that stuff, you literally. That's why I look at some of the sporting teams marketing in new markets. Now you've got to market. You've just got to relentlessly hero build till someone attaches. You can keep telling them when you're playing, but unless you've got someone to follow, no one buys a ticket unless they've got a favourite person they're following or have hope for.
And that goes across the board of so many things. We do a lot of educational content, and it's all around like how do you build representation in the content where people can see themselves, and where does it make it stick? And like F1 is paramount to that. It'd be interesting to see it take it to tennis. Tennis is pretty boring, but my perspective in terms of just what you see of a personality there, but what it could build out is fascinating. So yeah, one question I want to ask you, and you're well placed for it, is how do you build in diversity into the broadcast and the visibility? Like, I feel like that's where democratization of media is landing it, and the opportunity is there to capitalize on it. But we're also reverting arguably back to just a reimagined linear TV, which is just streaming.
Well, there is the most colossal war going on in this diversity and DEI space now, where you got one hand people saying DEI didn't earn it. It's not a meritocracy. That people are getting promoted and that quality is being affected. That people aren't doing the traditional apprenticeships. On the other hand, people are saying there's no gaps. There's no way for the daisy to get through the cracks and reach the sunshine. They're two of the most entrenched camps that I've ever seen as far as not being able to see any of the other's argument. Stage one diversity is just getting. There's only one solution for diversity, and that is a segmented marketing. When you put everyone together in one picture, like a sort of the "We Are the World" Benetton ad, no one responds to that. You've actually got to. People have to. There's only one solution. That's people dropping one big ad that you think you're going to win the Cannes Festival Award, the $1 million ad, and you've got to do $20,000, $50,000 ads each. That group, because like we've got a European, and then what's Europe? Russia to Portugal that's your branding as some sort of common themed group, but you look at Eurovision, you couldn't get a more diverse group of people imaginable. Like when people say African, well, there's 54 countries there, all diverse, all different histories, don't lump them in together. But at least if you're going to do just generic African, have Africans in there. So the only way to do it, people fiddle around and dabble in diversity, and it's a box ticking exercise. But if you really want to reach, you've got to go in language and in culture, or in first language, whatever the language of emotion is for that community. That's where you need to go into. But I do video brands, multicultural brand stories. Bread and butter of my business. And
Yeah,
it's
can you
the only
speak to
thing.
that?
Pardon?
Can you speak to that? How that rolls out and where that came from, Cultural Pulse, and why
Well,
that?
Cultural Pulse is an evolution of a couple of previous businesses we've rebranded along the way. But since 2005, I worked for the Sydney Kings as a sales and marketing director. And I was always wondering where the Asians were in the crowd, because I know that Philippines, Indonesia, I know that they had basketball competitions, actually their own basketball competitions around Sydney, but they weren't here in the Kings. So when I met with them, had a bit of a powwow, and we came to the conclusion that they knew nothing about the Kings. They didn't feel welcome. So we ran a series of nights, an Indonesian night where we had a community bay, and we got upwards of 1,000 for some communities, down to 200 for others, but they had their first sampling experience, and that's a very shallow way of engagement. But it's a definite first step, particularly for families if the kids see it. And it's a fun night out there, and there's a lot of dancing and prizes and T-shirts flung into the crowd. It really is a high activity outing to go to the basketball. And then we did a Filipino night, and then we marketed some memberships, and 300 odd Filipinos came in as members just because we had done some engagement, some advertising in Tagalog, their language, and had treated them like a unique community with their own needs and tailored it around that. And a whole bunch of families came in because the kids were playing basketball in the local thing. And they thought it was a good thing for them to come and see the pros and have that as the interim pathway that they could aim for. And I thought, wow, this is, a little bit of love and segmentation. Then I realized when I worked in China for a year and Indonesia for a few years, and whenever anyone marketed to me in English or a flyer or something in English, I would be happily prepared to pay overs the dollars because they had reached me in first language and taken the effort. And gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions, selling emotions or emotions full stop. And since then, I've been marketing. We've done 25 major sporting events with Cultural Pulse and Red Elephant, the group before that. All the big World Cups, the last FIFA Women's World Cup, which is probably our most chef's kiss moment, where nobody expected the 31 sellouts that we were able to get in matches that did not involve the Matildas or the football ferns in New Zealand. And we ignited the communities to come out, and they really showed Australian fans how passionate the world game can be if it's let loose in a positive way. So, and that is messaging in first language, videos in first language, and marketing out through channels to communities, and the gratitude you get and buy-in you get. And we do a lot of community. We've got about 5,000 community influencers in our database from multicultural communities. So there's anyone I can call about anything, because every time I assume something, I'm wrong. So I always freshen every perspective by speaking to the source. You learn. These are things you learn. Assume nothing, because things change as well. Even what was the same pre-COVID might be different post-COVID. So I've got a huge army of people happy to give me insights because we've worked on Commonwealth Games or worked on the Rugby League World Cup. We've got that trust that's already been developed, that you develop by working on a project with someone. Because a lot of people don't realize, you're lucky to have grown up with soccer. Diversity is a muscle. You actually need to practice it. You need to be around it. You need to experience it. And if you don't, I can't blame people because as John F. Kennedy said, we fear what we do not understand. And if you haven't been around people and you just have like the news limited narrative where there's a stack of disproportionate demonization of multicultural communities or in really pointing it out or like the way they take these Lebanese gang wars, it's just like they look at it as the greatest way to sell newspapers. People are being terrorized. It's not a plaything. So, it needs to be practiced. You need to be around people, and then you by being around people, you find those 90% commonalities that you're able to celebrate the 10% difference, because you realize we're all want to live long and have healthy lives and have happy families and be good neighbors and participate in things that are larger than us and find purpose and meaning through engaging with the community. We all want those exact same things, every single community. And once you realize that can be a good thing. I remember Sting had a song, do the Russians love their children too? That in the absence of positive narrative, people start to ascribe subhuman traits as if the Russians are, while all the politicians are playing, they're not sending their kids off to school and trying to feed them and get them into better clothes. They're exactly the same dance we're all doing. But once people get dehumanized, it's, it can ultimately lead to genocide because it provides rationalization for all sorts of horrifying behavior.
It does, and I think that's where sport can be a leveling field. If you think back, I was at community radio. I remember a big story over Christmas. It was a quiet period in news, and African gangs was such a knee-jerk reaction. And people, it was a horrible moment to feel that and see that and speak to community who were feeling that backlash. And it was just such a scapegoat for for a lack of news, for one, and then it became a political piece as elections rolled through. And you just see that time and time again. But then you see sport play out, and unfairly, it's put upon representatives of those communities who are in the public eye to shatter some of those expectations put upon that community or reservation, or what is it, stereotypes, and often for the worse. So it's a that's why I find sport really powerful. It's unfortunate what happens in the world, but that's the way it goes. But sometimes sport can do that, and it's on the hero story who do that. It's a powerful moment. It's really cool to hear your work though around how meeting people at language and how profound that is. I think so many people forget just what meeting someone there and where they speak at home and how they speak is it's just something so powerful. We spoke about that, well, you did, especially around that emotive piece for F1. Like you pick a person who looks like you, but if you're hearing your voice back and haven't heard it for a long time, you really do get that buy-in. Can you tell us how that played out for the Matildas and the World Cup, Women's World Cup, and that role that you played specifically at Cultural Pulse?
Well, we didn't play that much of a role with the Matildas. The Matildas was they'd already had 12 or 11 sellouts. I forget that they were already a juggernaut coming in. But Sam Kerr's calf injury was created. It was two phenomena were at play. One was her calf injury forced the media to go beneath her for the secondary narratives of our other team members because she was the only global superstar. Some of them are heading in that direction now, but Sam Kerr was doing bicycle kicks and somersaults and was a hero for Chelsea. And she transcended the game here. She had her own T-shirts. Boys were talking about her. She was, in the top three and arguably the biggest Australian sporting star, just to show how far we've come. But when we were so expectant for this World Cup that when her calf injury happened, the media, and this touched on the second phenomenon, the way tournaments work is if the crowds are bad early, the media becomes savages and they attack the administrators for not having the crowds there and the negative news cycle, and you can't stop it. You can't control the narrative. Then you've lost control of it.
With you. So
the big crowds early meant that you've got all of this commercial media for the first time spotlighting on a women's event. They've been starved of the oxygen of negativity, and this is the first time you would say positive female storytelling was happening with a male level of media coverage.
Above that, it was
like a perfect storm.
Records.
Yeah, and they couldn't just go for the usual Sam Kerr stories, so it forced them down to tell the Caitlin Ford and the Hayley Raso. So we had, for the first time, commercial level media hero building happening, and Australia responded unbelievably to knowing these girls. And this is the normal layer of storytelling that would happen for a big men's event. So we actually saw when the big media were a force for good for females, people came out, and this is not just storytelling about the Matildas, about Marta from Brazil and, different superstar, the fall of Megan Rapinoe and the Americans. That was a compelling narrative, the Grand American, shaky, going for 3 in a row, but, getting eliminated. They revel in playing the villain in those international tournaments. So all of these narratives that a lot of people hadn't known about, and you've got to know about them. So the storytelling was great. We learned about Mary Fowler and her family's journey with her brothers and sleeping in the car in Holland. And, for those that are into the follow your dream at all costs type of narrative, there you go with Mary. Caitlin Ford, the, tomboy, basically, whose best friend was a boy, told she, child prodigy, played for the Matildas at 16, and now 29-year-old, this wise old, been through it all, seen it all, just rising up when the big match. We got fed all this, so that was just a great illustration of when media is a force for good, what an unbelievable impact it can have. When everyone knows the stories, and that's the barrier. If you don't know the stories, you're not going to leave your routine and change your weekend or build 10 weeks of your weekend in the case of following a team, unless you're bought into a single narrative. It's not going to happen.
Mm. It's so true. And just to pull on that, like, what was the role Cultural Pulse did there? I found it fascinating to hear that sort of, were you translating a lot of the videos and creating a lot of that to meet community here in Oz,
We
to
were
go to
FIFA's
different games?
we were FIFA's official multicultural marketing agency. So for hero building, for the 30 teams we were entrusted with, we've profiled 5 players from each community with some with bios. We pushed them out to the community as awareness piece. We had a community influencer program of more than 200 people from those communities who were driving those narratives through social. We have our own databases that we've developed over the years that we marketed out to. And we did translated assets and some video content from our community ambassadors, basically call outs to the communities in first language.
Sweet. So good to hear that sort of different approaches go towards sport and include people where they are and how they interact in life.
Well, you have to now. You've got to go to where people are. They're not going to come to you. They've got choice now. In the old days, they didn't. 2 newspapers, 5 newspaper stations, commercial radio. That was it. There were just gatekeepers galore. But now it goes back to that democratization point we spoke of earlier. It's really up to you now to galvanize and crystallize the group around you, because the technology tools mean you can manage communities way easier. And you, with look at GWS and their edgy social media, kind of dominating the AFL landscape because they went at it a little bit differently. Everyone's got the same budget. So I look at creativity as the last unfair advantage, where everyone else is on a level playing field on pretty much all other, it's all systematized. But creativity is that last piece where a little guy can look $1 million with the right idea and staying the course and building a series out of it.
Yeah, creativity and bravery to go for it. I think is a strong one. And you said something at the top of this chat around digging into that first cave around fear. We had Andy Pearson around Liquid Death. That's he's the head creative at Liquid Death, doing water like no one's done it, which is a weird sentence to say, but his whole guiding compass is, following fear, and sort of that leads you to a place of being able to uncover the gems or the gold, as you said. He does that in running as well, which I find a fascinating way.
Well, you think about it, everyone listening has a bill or something they should be paying that's going to release and liberate them, or, they've got a workaround on their computer where, they could lose their data tomorrow, or they don't have their phone backed up. We've all got that one thing, and people always say if you walk towards that and hug your monsters, you free up your capacity to go and do other things. Neuroscience has come out with all research now that says an unfinished task just sits there niggling away and taking up, vital space.
Cognitive power.
And that, again, sport teaches you that, starting and finishing things. You don't leave the ground unless all the cones have been picked up. You got to put up the poles at the start of the day and put it down. Get people into that starting and finishing mentality, which is probably the most valuable life skill you'll have, just to set the ship to the North Star and see it out.
No, wise words. And there's something I always like to ask your guests, and that is, there's a little scenario around eco-anxiety that we're building a bit of a data set on different approaches, and it's, how would you develop a course to be able to, because there is a rise in youngsters around having this eco-anxiety that the world's, ending essentially, and sort of a lot of the narratives in media that are affecting young people coming into young adulthood, it feels like we're handing over a dying earth. And we're asking guests who have lived interesting lives and take interesting tacks in life around, what's a way that you feel like we could be able to develop a course or something to give kids a sense of agency in that space? Like, what's a mechanism or something that you would, off the top of the head, think? And I'm seeing sport coming pretty strong here, but over to you.
Well, I think in sport, catastrophists are the disaster of any group of people, whether it be fans or players, and catastrophists are weeded out if they're constantly negative and doomsaying. Because if that's the case, we may as well just become nihilists and go in that direction. So I find in the eco side of it, the catastrophists, they've gone back to a primal fight or flight instinct, and it's pretty scary to be around, because who wants to deliver kids into an environment that? So I think positive, pointing out there's a lot of positive stuff going on as well, and balancing it out, and I would like to see the movement away from climate change as the metric. I would like to see the movement towards pollution, because there's no doubting pollution. It impacts everybody. Climate change could go up and down. We've seen some numbers come through, and yes, climate change. But if that's one of the seven, if the iceberg melting is one of 10 or 12 things, but I think that tends to be so catastrophic that you lose sight of the other maybe 12 pillars of the eco space that need to be addressed. And there's huge wins happening there as well. If youngsters are fed a constant stream that the world is going to end, the henny penny sky's falling, they get fatigued by it, and then you can't get through with the true messaging. The boy who cried wolf, classic mythology. So I think that you'll get a much more traction. You won't get a closed mind. People say the thing's going to burn up and we're gone and we're cooked. No one's open for anything positive. So just positive eco storytelling, I think there's unbelievable wins happening everywhere. Species are being brought back to life. Rivers are being resuscitated. Forests are being replaced. By concentrating on all of the bad stuff, like in sport, why would you want to? You can say, okay, we've got the wooden spoon. Or you can say, look, we've signed these three guys. A sport is dealers in hope, and the people on the eco side and storytelling need to be dealers in hope as well, or people will just switch off. Why would they constantly move towards something that makes them feel miserable and robs them of their purpose and meaning?
It's a really valid point, and I think that's what we're up against, is that old age saying of if it bleeds, it leads, and I think that's what climate change often does in media, and it's also twofold on social. It's pretty dramatic. It's pretty horrifying.
Like the iceberg's crashing down. If that's not countered by some positive things, I don't blame kids for either just going into, plus COVID, a bunch of things that these kids have been through. I think negative storytelling is so easy. It's simplicity. It's anyone can do it, but just relentless flooding the zone with positive storytelling is the only way we're going to get kids to engage at a higher level and give their energy to it and give up their time and their mental space. Or I'd go back to a video game as well. The moment you catastrophize, you're driving people to escape, and escapism means not facing up to anything, not even a diluted version of it. So, all power to positive storytelling. Stories are us, and the story archetypes that survive the campfire, hero's journey and fish out of water, and all these good storytelling archetypes, they still work and they should be applied. They work unbelievably in sport. That's what I deploy: 30 different storytelling archetypes. Even Cain and Abel, when two brothers play each other or two best friends fall out, that's a powerful, powerful storytelling narrative that's seared into our DNA from tens of thousands of years of ancient storytelling. It's all there locked within us. So that's what my stories do. They just apply any of these story archetypes that we have in our brain as exciting. We just wrap them in sport as the delivery mechanism.
That's a really interesting point, how to do that on eco space or more on agency space, and meeting kids once again where they're at and what's concerning them. I have a question for you that was from our previous guest. So, but before that, I just want to say thanks for sharing. It's a hard question and a strange curveball in it, but it's proving valuable. So I appreciate you being honest there. I really wanted to ask you a question passed on from previous guests, and that is, what would be the ultimate gift your life could represent to others?
The ultimate gift? I think if I could help create unlock a generation of storytellers. I think we need stories. We need positive storytellers. So to the point where negative was 10% and positive was 90%. I think people thrive on it. The comments I get in my LinkedIn about, people need that dopamine hit of positivity now. And it would be great for somehow that to be unlocked and people want to tell stories from the past, stories about themselves, stories of positive stories that, have the storytelling elements, not just shameless self-promotion wrapped in a story. Real stories that are nourishing to people, and because we used to have that. We used to have storytellers that went from town to town. Yeah, it was called the griot in the West Indies, the Shawnee in Ireland. Everyone had it, and they were second to the king, and people would feed them and and give them money, they were considered so valuable that they teach us who we are and who we can be through our cultural lens. And I think we're losing a little bit of that. If we can get that back and just have strong storytellers that constantly remind us of what's meaningful and what's purposeful in life, and whatever these things we're up against, someone has been through it before. What are stories? Don't feed a crocodile to the little kids. Look at, one-armed Uncle Wally, who happens to be the subject of that particular cautionary tale. Or don't eat the berries. Remember, Aunt Sally went loopy when she ate the red berries. Stories have had this survival information transmission, but they can also fill us with wonderment, because we are the only ones that I know that dream at the scale we dream. And if we dream, we can put up with anything. And that's why sport, they are dealers in hope. When all else is around, I know I can go out, escape for my 90 minutes, watch my footy team, suffer or celebrate whatever's going on. And I'm just part of that. I'm part of that something larger, and it's in our DNA. We need it, and sport provides that. As clumsy as it can be at times, and it's not the panacea for all ills, nor should it be, but a strong sport culture in any country from grassroots up, you'll find, generally speaking, social cohesion levels are higher.
Yeah, no, well said. And then a question that you would like to pass on to another guest that'll be in the seat.
Another guest question. Okay. Do you believe that everything you want is on the other side of fear?
Love that. Patrick Skene, it's been an absolute pleasure to have a chat with you. Thanks for joining.